Hey gamers, welcome to Video Games in the World. I am John. Today, in honor of the new Castlevania animated Netflix series, we will touch the history of the Castlevania franchise. This is one of my most favorite franchises in gaming, and it has a special place in my heart. It is a dark fantasy themed action-adventure game series created by Konami, centered on the Belmont family, a clan of vampire hunters who fight against Dracula and his unholy legion. The first game released for the Famicom in Japan and NES in America was so successful and received critical acclaim and spawned a very popular franchise. All those years of vampire hunting and creature slaying. Each game had a new Belmont, and there were other games in which the Belmonts were not the main protagonists. Most games were side-scrolling platformers, while others still had the side-scrolling, but rather than stages, it had exploration with RPG elements such as EXP. Castlevania was so popular, and it still has the spotlight up unto this day. Let us begin our journey into the world of Castlevania. Enjoy! The Castlevania series was heavily inspired by books and old films about supernatural creatures, such as vampires, werewolves, Medusa, mummies, the Grim Reaper, and even the Frankenstein monster himself. The vampire genre was popularized by the Bram Stoker novel, Dracula. Mary Shelley was the creator of the Frankenstein novel. As for werewolves, the genre of shape-shifting man-woman creature was popularized by the 1930s movie, The Wolfman, and even other movies in the late 20th century such as An American Werewolf in London and its sequel, An American Werewolf in Paris. Since those days, vampires, werewolves, zombies, and various mythical creatures were a part of pop culture and was very much loved by lovers of these stories. And this is where Castlevania comes in. The common elements of the game were borrowed from such creatures, and the original game mentioned parody names modeled after famous people associated with the horror genre such as Bram Stoker, a satirical name of the original author of Dracula, Bram Stoker. In the original game, there were other famous names that were satirized such as Christopher Lee, Bela Lugosi, Boris Karloff, Barbara Shelley, and Lon Chaney. Christopher Lee and Bela Lugosi at one point played as Dracula. Boris Karloff portrayed the Frankenstein monster and also the mummy. Barbara Shelley was in various Dracula movies, and Lon Chaney Jr. portrayed the famous Wolfman for the 1941 movie, The Wolfman. Unfortunately, there was no name that satirized Peter Cushing, who in many Dracula movies played as Abraham Van Helsing, before he was Governor Tarkin in Star Wars Episode 4, A New Hope. And now, onto the story of the series. The story of every game in the series was always about the Belmonts, a family of vampire hunters who fought against powerful creatures and demons before defeating their arch enemy, Dracula. According to the lore, every century, Dracula is resurrected from the grave, and a Belmont rises up to fight against the vampire lord and his minions. Rather than Abraham Van Helsing helping Jonathan Harker defeat Dracula, it's the Belmont family who fights against him for centuries. The main weapon of the Belmonts is their legendary ancestral whip known as the Vampire Killer. In the games, there were extra projectile sub-weapons available such as axes, knives, cross, stopwatch, and the holy water. In Rondo of Blood and Symphony of the Night, Richter would use the Holy Bible as a weapon. In Dracula's Curse, Aoife Belnades would use fire, ice, or lightning as her sub-weapons. However, in Rondo of Blood, Maria Renard would use animals as her weapons such as a bird, a cat, an egg, a music book, a turtle, and a dragon. Usually, fans' favorite sub-weapons would be either the cross or the holy water. However, in other games, the Belmonts were not the main protagonists, but at one point are mentioned. In Circle of the Moon, the main protagonist is called Nathan Graves, who wields a whip similar to the vampire killer called the Hunter's Whip, much to the jealousy of Hugh Baldwin, son of his master, Morris. In Bloodlines, the main characters are Quincy Morris and Eric Lacarde. Eric Lacarde uses a lance, and Quincy Morris uses a whip, and is said to be a distant descendant of the Belmonts, and it is also one of the characters in the Dracula novel by Bram Stoker. And finally, in Aria and Dawn of Sorrow, the main hero is Soma Cruz. However, after beating the game with Soma, gamers have the chance to play as Julius Belmont. The story of its origin is shown in Castlevania, Lament of Innocence, where its prototype form is created by Rinaldo Gandolfi for Leon Belmont through the use of alchemy. This whip is later fused with the soul of Leon's betrothed, Sarah Trantoul, giving birth to the vampire killer. Games that were not canonical to the main story of Castlevania were Legends, Circle of the Moon, Legacy of Darkness, and Castlevania 64. Nevertheless, they were still successful and popular. Lords of Shadow served as a reboot of the franchise, and features Gabriel Belmont on a quest to defeat the titular Lords of Shadow. While it does indeed feature the usual Castlevania motifs of vampires, werewolves, and the undead, the plot is set before the rise of Dracula himself.